We now move slightly further north to Glasgow, where William Primrose was born in 1904. The eldest of three children, William Primrose was presented with a violin from his father at the age of 4. He proved to be a very gifted child, performing the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto at the age of 12. In 1919, the Primrose family moved to London, and it was there that the young William Primrose took studies at the Guildhall School of Music. In 1924, he moved to Belgium, where he took lessons from the great Eugene Ysaÿe. And actually, it was when Ysaÿe heard Primrose playing on an Amati viola that he suggested to him he really ought to pursue a career as a violist. Of course, Primrose's father wasn't too pleased with the suggestion, but in fact, it was that very suggestion that went on to make quite a legacy. As a violist, William Primrose's career quickly took off. He was a member of the London String Quartet. He then went on to found the Primrose Quartet, and then he moved to America and became the principal viola of the NBC Symphony Orchestra. He was also held in very high esteem as a soloist, with a formidable technical ability. In fact, his virtuosity was really second to none. He was a kind of Heifetz of the viola. He made transcriptions of many short, extremely virtuosic violin pieces, and also commissioned an awful lot for the instrument. He made the first ever studio recording of Berlioz's Harold in Italy from 1834. And he commissioned the Bartók Concerto, which went on to be one of our most important works in the repertoire. He was the dedicatee of Britten's Lacrimae, although we'll speak a little bit more about that piece and its history later. He performed the Woolton Concerto a lot, with the composer also as conductor. Primrose was also a very eminent teacher, mainly teaching in prominent schools around the United States, but also giving masterclasses abroad when he visited Australia, when he visited Asia. In 1953, he was made a CBE, and he also has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Really quite incredible for a violist, I think. In 1979, the first ever viola competition was created in his memory, in his honor, and he died in Utah in 1982. But there is an engraved plaque at the family home in Glasgow that still reminds us that one of the greatest musicians of all time, the viola player William Primrose, was born here in 1904. We are now going to watch and hear a short clip of William Primrose playing the viola, which shows his extraordinary musicality, technique, and ability to get around the instrument like no one else. Our second female composer, Imogen Holst, was born in 1907 in Richmond, London. She was the only child of Gustav Holst and was a composer, arranger, conductor, teacher, and musicologist. For 20 years, she was joint artistic director of the Aldborough Festival. In the early 1950s, she became Britten's assistant, and in 1964, she gave up her work for him to compose and concentrate on the preservation of her father's legacy. Her own music is not so well known and hasn't received so much performance or attention, but she was an important female figure in composition in the latter half of the 20th century. At the RCM, she studied with Herbert Howells, and she also studied conducting with W.H. Reed. Imogen Holst actually spent a great deal of time in this very room where we are right now, and she died in Aldborough in 1984. We're going to be playing one of her last works for the viola, the Duo for Viola and Piano, written for Cecil Aronowitz and his wife, Nicola Grunberg, in 1968. It has three main sections, and we'll be playing you excerpts from the opening movement and also the finale. Other works for viola include a Duo for Viola and Piano back from 1918 when she was very young, a solo work from 1930, and also a concertante work for viola and orchestra from 1976. She wrote a great deal of chamber music as well, and also some music for the violin. So our next composer is definitely one of the most important composers of the 20th century, Benjamin Britten. And we've been extremely lucky to be here these days in his home, here at the Red House in Aldborough. Britten was born in 1913, not very far from here, just up the Suffolk coast in Lowestoft. And he played the viola as a child, starting lessons aged 10. One of his first works was actually an etude for solo viola, written in 1929. And later that year, he wrote a piece for viola and strings called Introduction and Allegro. Both of these pieces were left unpublished. However, the premiere was given at Snape Maltings in 1997 with Roger Chase as the soloist. So in 1930, we know from Britten's diary that he was practicing the viola quite a lot. And on the weekends, he would go and stay with Ethel and Frank Bridge and play chamber music. It was reported that when he wasn't at the piano, he was at the viola. And there are three compositions dating from that year, from 1930. Firstly, there was a reflection, which was written in the late spring. And then shortly after he left school, he wrote a piece which was untitled, but later given the name Elegy. And then finally, towards the end of that year, he wrote a piece, portrait, called a self-portrait. The viola remained a really big part throughout his life, and there's other compositions which I'll talk about. But just a couple of years later, whilst he was a student at the Royal College of Music, he wrote another piece which never got published. In fact, a really great piece called The Double Concerto. And this piece also actually was given its premiere in the 90s at the Aldborough Festival. And I had the pleasure of playing this piece a few times. And last year, I performed this piece together with the Tapiola Sinfonietta, Fumika Mori and Jonathan Bloxham in Finland. So I'd now like to share with you some of that recording. So we're here today, right in front of the library, which is where we've been recording these beautiful short pieces for you. And this is where Britten spent a lot of his later years, composing, meeting with colleagues, having rehearsals, and it's a really important place. And so I would like to tell you a bit about Frank Bridge, because I mentioned Bridge earlier, and he was one of Britten's biggest inspirations and a mentor to him, a really important figure in his life. Britten, in fact, made an arrangement of one of his teacher's pieces called There is a Willow Grows Aslant of Rook. One of the most important pieces in the viola repertoire of the 20th century is the Lachrymé, written by Benjamin Britten. Britten was on tour with Peter Pears in New York when he met the great Scottish virtuoso of the viola, William Primrose, and he promised Primrose the dedication of his Lachrymé for viola and piano if he would come to the Aldborough Festival and perform it together with him. So, in 1950, William Primrose came and they gave the premiere of Lachrymé for viola and piano. It was broadcast by the BBC and was a really important event of the last century. Actually, the Lachrymé is a piece that Britten returned to in his later years. In fact, in his final year of life, in 1976, he made a new version of the Lachrymé for viola and string orchestra. This was made for the great South African violist Cecil Ronowitz, and they performed the Lachrymé here with string orchestra in 1976. The piece which we've chosen to play for you today is the waltz from Britten's suite, Opus 6. It's the only movement of the suite which he arranged for the viola, and is a wild and virtuosic waltz. So we'd like to play that for you now.